Interesting. So as these technologies progress, how does because you would uniquely have a view on this, how does a 5G network become for the use case, both for Internet of Things, blockchain, and other emerging technologies? What is the distinction between a 4G and a 5G network generally, and then how does it relate to the reliability and use cases here?
It's interesting, and I may sound like I'm biased, and I likely am, but I think that question should be part of every conference like this in every technology. So if this was a room of 1,700 people and we were talking about virtual reality, we should be talking about 5G. If this was a group of retailers, we should be talking about 5G, because what 5G is going to do is it's going to be a massively scaled real-time network. And so that's gobbledygook to most people. But a real-time network that can operate as fast as the brain does, and with the ability to do compute in the network, creates a whole new design. And so everything you do is subject to being able to be designed differently. So I always use the example of virtual reality. Instead of having a backpack and a headset, you'll be able to wear a pair of glasses. The backpack is for the compute. And if the compute can be done in the network, and it's so fast that it's as quick as if it were being done locally, then it changes the architectural design. So I think they should be in industrial design schools. They should be talking about 5G networks, because people shouldn't be designing to old architectures. The same way when we talk about blockchain and identity and we say, you know, it's a who network, you shouldn't be designing processes based on what. You should be designing an architecture. So anybody who wants to do a startup or build a business has to be architecturally relevant. And it's obvious to people that are writing code, where you sit down and you say, okay, well, what language should this be in? And you know, everybody says, well, that's just like that's a no-brainer. You have to be in a modern code language, but you have to have a modern architecture. And I think this is a thing that it's hard for a company like ours, because you have an army of people that grew up with the technology, and they're wedded to the technology, and they're resistive to change. And when you make and how you make the call that says we're going to do a student body left on a new architecture, it's tough, because you're going to have pockets of resistance. Some people are going to leave your organization because they'll view it as, you know, nothing short of a religious war. And so that's why I think I'm terribly impressed and intrigued that Cleveland would put on this event right now. I think it's very prescient that folks here would realize that this is an architectural shift, and they don't come along every day, and it has an opportunity to have a geographic signature on it, which can transform what goes on in a city. I was afraid they were asleep. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to shift to one of my questions at the end, because you brought up Cleveland and our foresight to do this, but I have to say that a couple things you said in that commentary about 5G. We literally just last year retired a system that we had COBOL as part of it. And like you said, it was well depreciated. It was very low cost to run, but it was probably time to let it go. Not to mention everybody who supported it was past retirement age, and we were having to beg them to stay. And your point about it is a disruptor in the architecture, not just the application, and that's back to you're going to hate change, you're really going to hate extinction. Right. Because these are these kinds of pivots that we're talking about. So I'm going to ask the question you brought up about Cleveland. We are the city on the lake. I won't use some other terminology that we've been referred to. We have an incredible work ethic in this town. We are self-made and self-reliant, and we love to make fun of our own sports teams and our weather. But this was intentional by a group of civic leaders, really to bring this together, and I'm going to give kudos to Bernie Marino at the Marino Companies, Destination Cleveland, to put together a very ambitious 3 days to really start people thinking about this shift, this pivot that these new technologies are going to bring. You do business in cities all over the world. Talk a little bit about what it would take for Cleveland to become a city of choice for talent and technology, and really realize the potential of this next wave of technology, blockchain solutions and so forth. If it was a call to action, what would you say you think some of the ingredients of success will be?
Wow, that's a tough and tricky question. Let me start by just telling the audience a confession. I grew up in Pittsburgh. I would have thought that would have got a boo. So
we're polite, too. We're Midwesterners, we're polite.
Exactly. You left the polite part out. You know, this is a really interesting thing because there are tough calls here, because as a city, you can only bet a couple of these, and then people will start to say, well, there's another one of those. It's just one of those programs. But when they work, they're magic. And like when I go to Israel, that's now referred to as the startup nation, when they get it right, when you get it right, you have some of the world's best technology. Every new technology, folks take a flight over to Tel Aviv to figure out what they're working on. And so I view it as more about persistence than brilliance, and more about collaboration than capital. And so what that means is that you're going to have an intellectual hub, but you have to be in with the universities. You have to have, your intellectual energy has to be pointed to this. Your executive leadership needs to be pointed at this. And it will be some combination of investment and venture capital, but it's not going to be gigantic dollars. It's going to be shifts in some of the coursework at your best universities. It's going to be about your local companies becoming early adopters. And you did it with the Cleveland Clinic. You know, you look at it and you have world-class medicine that happens here that doesn't happen in a whole lot of other places, and it behaves kind of that way because you start to create a gateway to import the world's top talent because they want to come work on a problem. And so it takes a lot of recruiting and a lot of energy and a lot of collaboration between universities and companies, and a modest amount of investment, and then you build a flywheel. And the flywheel, you know, turns slowly in the beginning. And when I see it, most of the time, the cities run out of energy. They just get distracted with the other things and they don't stick with it. So, you know, I mentioned to David in the back, you know, my experience is the second this thing is over, start planning next year. Line up speakers that are a little better than this year.
Does that mean we're not coming back?
Yeah. Well, you can average up. You don't just get one, you know, super exciting one. No, so I think that it's a sustained effort. But when you see it work, there's always the obvious place to go for a technology, and then there's one or two cities that are non-obvious. So you look and you'd say that's true in the media business in production. That's true in the media business in talent. That's true in the wireless business. And so the cities have pulled it off. And there are a lot of these hubs that are, you know, strange things. Like St. Louis, for whatever reason, has some of the best back office programming on the planet in big volume. You want to go and scale back office systems, St. Louis is the place to go. And you look in there and you'd say, well, what is it? Their CIOs all talk to each other. You know, if I'm going to downsize over here, then those guys say, I might need a group like that. So there's more of an employment security net. What makes Silicon Valley successful technologically is you can change jobs and keep the same parking space. And so, and that becomes true, and it becomes true in a technology. And so you get a few of the building blocks in place, you get together and you adapt, and you put your energy in so that you can sustain an effort, and then all of a sudden your successes start to build, and then someone runs the flag up, and then you become an import location. And you'll get the things you don't need. It's a great city for a lot of reasons. It's gentrifying. You say it's on the lake. You don't have great weather, and it's not Pittsburgh, but you do have a lot going for you.
We got a lot of good water out there too, and this is an energy-intensive business as well. Some of these technologies.
Exactly.
So you were talking about how you kind of lock arms and make something happen. So I would have this question have two prongs to it. One prong are if you were a non-AT&T person and were thinking about how you would start some use cases and where you would start trying to civically build this muscle memory and create that distinctiveness. If you were running the world, where would you put that? And then just generally, how should some companies think about how to think of blockchain as a business case for their businesses?
Well, I think that, I mentioned earlier, it's as simple as saying, where's the biggest impact with the lowest friction? And I think if I were looking at it, if you made me mayor for the day, I'm not as, tall, dark, and handsome as your mayor, but I would probably get the companies together and say, where do we have common use cases? And then we can have a shared result. And there's enough of them out there, whether it's for authentication and security. And then, you're a large enough company, you have a large enough employers here, you can start to look and say, how do we get some of our suppliers? We're all going to be working on the same type of problem. And I would try to find the use case that applies across enough businesses where you could start to build a hub of expertise. And then I think I would do something that is counter-traditional. I would create the same governance structure across the companies that you would do within the companies. So I would have, once a month, have the CIOs of the top 10 companies get together and treat this as if it were an important project for a company. It is an important project. It's an important project for the city. And I think what Cleveland is doing aspirationally is awesome, because I think the city of the future is going to be one that can bring its citizens into entry-level work and then keep progressing them. Because I think a career in the future, a career can't last more than a decade. You can have more than a decade tenure with a company, and but you can't. Even your own job changes dramatically enough that if you went to Mars and came back, by the time you came back, it wouldn't look like your job anymore. And so I think when you look at this from a city perspective, cities have to think about, I need a bunch of entry-level jobs. For you to bring 1,000 jobs into Cleveland that requires high skill that you don't have in Cleveland, all you've done is imported 1,000 people, and you've driven up your real estate prices and made traffic worse. So you have to, within the infrastructure, import a little, but provide the opportunity, but you have to do it in a layered fashion that allows people that graduate high school to have great opportunities, people who graduate college to have great opportunities, people who come with STEM degrees have great opportunities, but none of those are dead ends, because you can always then progress to the next, to the next, to the next. And I think universities, my own alma mater, Notre Dame, I went to them and said, look, I think this whole education system needs to be disrupted. I have a great experience for 4 years, and then you send me letters and ask for money. And I would like for you to adopt me for life. And I don't have any problem giving you money every year if you give me something back. So why don't you do continuing education and executive education and do stuff online and charge me for it? Because, that's a better relationship. And I think cities are going to have to start to think that way. And so I applaud, the founders, if you will, of Blockland for having the vision to say, let's go take a shot, because when you have a big opportunity like this, I think you owe it to this entire community, both technical and not, to see if you can't organize to get something meaningful to happen.